Welcome to episode 58 of the Business Development Podcast. And on today's episode, we are interviewing one of the leaders in Canadian UAV technology, Cole Rosentreter, with Pegasus Imagery. Stay tuned.
The great Mark Cuban once said, "Business happens over years and years. Value is measured in the total upside of a business relationship, not by how much you squeezed out in any one deal." And we couldn't agree more. This is the Business Development Podcast, based in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and broadcasting to the world. You'll get expert business development advice, tips and experiences, and you'll hear interviews with business owners, CEOs, and business development reps. You'll get actionable advice on how to grow business. Brought to you by Capital Business Development, capitalbd.ca. Let's do it. Welcome to the Business Development Podcast. And now your expert host, Kelly Kennedy.
Welcome to episode 58 of the Business Development Podcast. And on today's episode, we have an absolutely amazing founder and CEO story for you. After dedicating 15 years to the Canadian Army as a paratrooper, Cole chartered a new course by founding Pegasus in 2018. His vision? To revolutionize wildfire management by seamlessly bridging first responders with real-time data. All made possible through cutting-edge autonomous aircraft technology. From its modest beginnings, Pegasus has rapidly evolved into a powerhouse with a dynamic team of 25 full-time experts. Notable entities such as the Government of Alberta, Boeing, Thales, and Canadian Pacific Railway have all joined forces with Pegasus as customers and valued partners. The year 2020 marked a remarkable achievement as Pegasus secured a place as a NASA technology semi-finalist. The journey continued in 2022 when the company clinched the top spot in Boeing's prestigious global AI and autonomy accelerator held in London. Most recently in May, Pegasus garnered the esteemed Prince's Trust Global Sustainability Award, an accolade presented by His Majesty King Charles himself. Cole and his brainchild Pegasus stand at the forefront of innovation, weaving together technology, vision, and impact in unprecedented ways. Tune into our podcast as we delve into their extraordinary story, exploring intersections of courage, innovation, and sustainable progress. Cole, welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
Yeah, great to be here, Kelly. Thanks.
Okay, my listeners don't know this, but I'm a bit of a nerd. And when it comes to aviation, I have had a love of aviation since I was old enough to mumble. My dad always used to say, he took me to an air show when I was about like 1.5. And one of the first words that ever came out of my mouth was, "What noise does a jet make?" Because I absolutely loved them. And so like as a kid, I've always loved airplanes. I've always loved aviation. I got into RC aircraft when I was 16. I actually got one as a birthday present, and that ignited a total passion that still carries on to today. I always have an RC kicking around somewhere in the house that if it's a nice day and there's a field available, I love to go and fly. And yeah, it's one of those things that UAVs have always held an interesting place where I wasn't sure what to make of them or what the future might be for them. Because when I started seeing them in the recreational market, obviously in the mid 2010s, obviously back then the technology wasn't super fancy. They were kind of hard to fly in the beginning, took advancement and stuff to get them to where they're at today. But, to found a technology company based in UAV aerospace now, to see what that really means now, it's amazing, Cole. And I'm super, super excited to chat with you today about what that's going to mean for the future, not just here in Canada, but around the world.
Nerd is my highest term of endearment to people. So when you call yourself a nerd, it's you're striking a chord with me as well. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So take me back to the beginning. You can go back as far as you like. Obviously, you spent a very long time in the military, and I want to touch on that, obviously, before we start the show. You were the very first veteran I've had grace my stage, and I truly mean that, grace my stage. I hold veterans in the utmost esteem. I recognize very much so that without you going out there with the fellow veterans and the fellow Army to protect not just Canada, but Western nations as a whole, we owe it all to you. We really do. Freedom isn't free. And I just want to start out by saying thank you so much for your service, and thank you for essentially doing what you did so that I was able, and the listeners of this podcast are able to live in a free world.
I appreciate you. I never really actually have still figured out how to actually respond to it. I mean, the best way I could put it is, it is a team sport, and service is service, but it's also a privilege. I mean, you get a chance to volunteer as opposed to being conscripted like some other countries do. You select what you're going to do. You make a choice, you commit to it, and then you have an opportunity to make the most out of it, where you can get like just incredibly, honestly, unique experiences. So yeah. I was exceptionally lucky to serve, and I would say I had an extraordinarily average military career, which is definitely not trying to undersell it. There are people out there that have friends of mine or coworkers from the military who are still serving and have done like truly amazing things. So
yeah,
it's a team sport for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And 15 years is no small amount of time in any career. So tell me, how does one go from the military? Take us back to the beginning, Cole. Take us back. Tell us your journey. How does one end up going from the military and ending up the CEO of essentially a next level aviation robotics company?
Well, you basically have to, throughout the whole process, you're basically spending 9 out of 10 days chewing glass and staring into the abyss, trying to figure out what you don't know as quickly as you can before you die as a company. No, I mean, so I grew up for the most part in Edmonton. So I was, I have an older sister, 2 amazing parents. And then when I was graduating high school, my sister, who was a year older, obviously went forward and she knew what she wanted to do, go pursue an education degree at the University of Alberta. My parents asked me what I wanted to do, and I said, I don't know. And I know what I do know is I'm not going to go to university and spend a bunch of money on starting a degree if I'm not actually sure of what I want to do. So moved out of the house, got a job working in construction, started looking at an apprenticeship, and then spent the next 12 months working out in Fort Saskatchewan, actually, learning a trade. So during that process, that's actually where the first kind of big post high school, post graduation moment kind of happened. So I was working out at Fort Saskatchewan on September 11th in 2001, and a radio in the foreman's shack started talking about a plane flying to one of these twin towers at the World Trade Center in New York, and the rest of that is a pretty well known story, obviously. But for myself, it just seemed like, hey, something has just happened. Like this is one of these things that nobody knows what's going to happen next. And I was young, healthy, and it seemed like the call to action really resonated. And to be honest, it's one of these decisions in my life that I actually really don't remember making. It just was so straightforward. The next day, go down, Canada Place, and go sign up. So after that, the process is long. Actually, in Canada, it's not as fast as people think. So I actually didn't get into the military and begin my formal training pipeline until basically January 2003. So between 9/11 and January 2003, I ended up basically just working out a ton, trying to save up as much money as possible and getting ready for that.
For those that aren't familiar with what that process is like, which is probably 99% of us, what does that even look like? Like, obviously you were young, you were willing to go, and they made you wait 2 years. And is that just even before you made it to basic training?
Yeah, it's a very slow process because the Canadian Armed Forces through the 80s and 90s really had this quote unquote decade of darkness, and one of the easy ways to kind of look at reducing spending is obviously starting with the payroll. So looking at cutting the overall size of the force, which meant recruitment, and then induction and training pipelines really just kind of dragged out. So it's a really old, archaic process. It's not like going on Google. It's like finding the librarian who has a beard like Gandalf. They have to walk into a vault or a warehouse to go find you the one book, and that takes 2 hours. It's probably similar. So I started my basic training, and I was actually very lucky. Normally between different phases, you can get rolled back for injury or for something else. But all of mine was actually seamless. I think I had about 48 hours between all three. So started in January, and I got to my regiment, my 1st battalion, actually stationed back here in Edmonton in September of 2003. So basically 9 months straight.
Wow. And how soon after you'd essentially finished your training was your group sent overseas? So
the first time, my first deployment to southern Afghanistan in Kandahar was in 2005. And this was an extremely good learning experience. So, I joined a light infantry battalion, the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light. And then from there, after the first kind of year and a half, I ended up going to a weapons platoon. So basically all the heavy weapons, all the things that make the biggest bangs, which was an awesome place to be as a young guy. Also meant you had
Yeah.
to carry all the heaviest stuff, which is
So you were very fit.
very you got strong fast,
Yeah.
absolutely. So no, I did my first deployment in 2005, and that was only for a few months down south, basically helping set up a new theater of operations before a provincial reconstruction team would actually follow on behind us. And then it was a great opportunity. Honestly, we got embedded with American Task Force as a parent unit, and then really got to see what the outside world looks like.
Yeah. Like I can't even imagine. Like I really like, you know what I mean? It's very hard, I think, if you've never been in a war zone. I you know what I mean? I can feel how stressed out I would be being in that situation. And I just can't imagine, like, what is it like to adapt, to come from, it's your first deployment. You've never been probably anywhere for the most part. And the next thing you know, you're literally around the world and there's people on the other side of the fence that want to kill you. What is that even like? What is that like mentally?
It's extremely interesting looking back at it. I mean, at the time, hindsight being 2020 right now, but at the time, all you want to do is do what you've been training nonstop to go and do. And that's not fire weapons or, kill bad guys, all that kind of stuff. It's like you sign up for a mission and it is actually exercising all the different muscles, physically, mentally, intellectually, that, even for a 21-year-old, you put an 18 or a 21-year-old in the turret of a vehicle and give them a belt-fed machine gun. They're the only people really that can actually protect the other 4 people inside that vehicle. You're putting a huge amount of responsibility on somebody's shoulders at a very young age. And at that point, you're really exercising critical decision making, situational awareness, these small things. Absolutely. So these are one of these examples, I think, of getting put into a position where everybody can make a call. And in a lot of cases, your boss, who might have 10 years of experience ahead of you, he's sitting inside. He can't look over your shoulder. You're 2 feet away, but he may as well be 100. So that was a really interesting first deployment around that. It just comes down to, I think most people want to go and actually just gain the experience, and if and when it comes up, prove that you can actually follow through on all the training. You can actually play in the game.
Yeah. Well, I think, like, you were just talking about essentially the critical decision making, being able to make your own choices, make them quickly. I imagine those have contributed heavily to what has made you very successful in business.
I'd say it definitely contributes to the survival. Success is a weird thing because I think it's incredibly fickle to try and measure. So fast forwarding a little bit. So I ended up doing 3 deployments in Canada, 2005, 2007, and then over 2009 into early 2010. And then following that, it was a lot to go through.
Yeah.
So went on some other different training courses and things like that. Did another deployment as part of a NATO reaction to Russia invading Crimea in 2014.
I remember.
So ended up going in, spending several months in basically the north of Poland. So that was also a phenomenal experience to basically get as close to going back into the field, for going back to full speed, but also having an amazing amount of opportunities to continue to train. It was also one of the last major leadership positions that I held. So it was a phenomenal experience. The military is amazing. I mean, I can't recommend it enough. Even if you do 4 years, or if you want to do a full 20, 25, 30, whatever it is, you walk away with, I think now looking in hindsight, you get the most important skills that you really need. You get all the soft skills. I truly believe that I've probably met everybody that I've met in business several times before, just because you're exposed to a whole wide range of personalities. And unlike a lot of things, there's both a formal leadership development program in the military, but the vast majority of it comes through informal, like actually just being exposed to leaders at different levels, seeing bad leaders frankly. And then, you see every so often you find the rare gem that are just inspire you or terrify you, but also make you want to work harder for them, whatever the case is. So, I mean,
Yeah.
I was extremely lucky. I would have probably stayed in the military forever, Kelly, but the things that I did is, you do something right in the military, then they let you get away with it. If you do it right again and again, then they end up sending you on a course to go and teach it. So I ended up teaching parachuting and then became a parachute instructor. And so that's actually how the real story of launching the company really kind of started. Was I was actually teaching on a nighttime course for new paratroopers. So it was our night jump. We were flying in a Hercules, so a big multi-engine transport plane. Everybody went to go jump out. Essentially at night, so the plane, the lights inside are all dim. And somebody just made a mistake. One of the Air Force guys in the back accidentally dropped basically, the equivalent of like an extension cord kind of in my feet. So as I went to go jump out, I kind of got lassoed, hit the side of the plane, got towed behind it for,
Holy cow.
3 or 4 seconds. It was like a long 3 or 4 seconds, but
yeah, no kidding.
Cable broke. And then anyways, I ended up falling and parachute ended up deploying. And so one of the interesting things is, I landed, realized I'm pretty beat up, like obviously.
Yeah.
And then, with the help of some of the other instructors who obviously were, close friends of mine, they helped me walk off the drop zone, went back, we talked about it. And, 3 hours later, got back in a plane and went and jumped again. Because even though I was pretty hurt, the important thing here was like, I was still fit enough, probably go and get another jump in. And I was not going to let that actually be like the last defining moment. Because if you have something like that happen and you don't get back on the saddle right away, looking back, I probably should have gone to the hospital right away instead.
Totally.
But I went back, jumped again. And that was actually by far the very worst part of it, is actually going back and doing it again. But right after I went to the hospital and began the process of trying to figure out just a long list of all the things that were wrong. So that's actually what led me to actually leaving the military. So it took them a couple years to put me back together. And then in June of 2018, ended up medically retiring from the military and starting the company.
Wow. I don't even know where to start with that, Cole. That's crazy. That's like Mission Impossible level in the crazy.
It sounds when I explain to people that I'm always happy to talk about this because I think it's extremely important. It's obviously a very personal thing when you get banged along the side of a plane. And by the way, my life did not flash before my eyes.
That wasn't your moment.
I don't think anything in my DNA was pre-programmed to ever have that experience. So it's like, okay, I'm like, I just did the drill that I would, would practice what I preached, and got a chance to kind of get away with it. But after that, I mean, I ended up getting married, and now we've got 3 kids. And I kind of look back at this like, as big of a moment as it was. I mean, it's probably the nudge that it was a big nudge, but it's probably the nudge I needed.
It changed the whole trajectory.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I look at that as well too. I see a lot of people complain about the hardships in their life, and I've been one of them. I've had some plenty hardships in my life where I complained about them, but the reality is that every single hardship led me to the place I am today, right? Like, this show wouldn't exist without hardship. The Business Development Podcast wouldn't exist. It took adversity and overcoming adversity to take us here. And I don't think that I think every choice we have has repercussions, but if you're in a good place today, or if you have something that you value, you have to take it with everything that got you there, not just the great thing it is today.
Absolutely. I mean, it's my story, and some days I wish it turned out maybe slightly different, but not in like a large way. I mean, I've got an amazing wife, 3 kids, 2 big Bernese mountain dogs. I've still got amazing friends, and I've been able to spend the last 5 years throwing my entire heart and soul into a mission, not just a company that I truly believe in. So,
I do have a question for you, Cole, just being my first veteran. I don't know how true this is, just because I unfortunately, I don't know enough veterans in my life. But I do understand that reintegrating into society can be very challenging for a lot of veterans. Like you said, it's a completely different world. Before we started the show today, we had a quick chat regarding it, and Cole was just mentioning how there's nothing really. It's hard to they're so different, right? Like if you're in a war zone or you've been in multiple war zones, or in your case, you've been on 3 deployments over the period of 10 years, and then you just come back into a regular life where people don't know, like they're not even paying attention to that war. They got so many other things going on, life's just moving on. It feels to me, and like obviously I have no idea because I've never met you personally. We've never sat down for coffee, and I'd love to, by the way, at any time.
Yeah, absolutely.
but it appears to me like you've done something that so many veterans struggle with, but not only reintegrating with society, but creating a very successful business and going to what feels like a real normal life. Do you have any advice for veterans listening? Maybe you might be talking to future people coming out of the Army, or people that are just in that business course like you were talking about, that are coming out and they have nobody. They have nobody because nobody's had that experience. Do you have anything that you would say to them? How did you do it? What kind of advice would you give them?
The thing with the military, I think, is a lot of people look at this and they would see at face value, oh, we have a chain of command, and it's very vertical. It's not a flat organization by any stretch. Except, that's the chain of command, like the different layers of responsibility that all add up in the pyramid. The other side, though, and it's different experiences, but where I was from, the decisions were, mundane or life critical. It was bottom up planning. You had, in a lot of cases, you would have like a 23-year-old brand new platoon commander come in, and then, the senior enlisted in that platoon, a sergeant, senior sergeant, or a warrant officer. They've got 15 years, 20 years sometimes, and they have all the experience. So it's about combining the two. Young kind of supercomputer thinking is the idea, and the leadership side to that, and then also about developing, a good relationship. It's got to be bottom up planning and bringing those skills into the business world, or either the private or the public sector. I think this is the one thing that people in the military have to, we have to do a better job of. Prior to getting medically retired, most people thought I was completely nuts. They're like, drones, what's that? I'm like, it's not really drones. Like, well, it's a different idea, but it involves them. And they're like, I don't really know what that means. Like, okay. The default is, from the infantry especially, like, well, what are you going to do? Get out and either dig ditches or be a cop, or maybe go work in a prison. And it's like, yeah, those are all jobs that are at face value 5 feet on the other side of the fence. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people leave the military and they don't really know what their intrinsic value or real kind of unique value proposition or superpower is. The one thing that the military gives you on a bell curve, but on the median, you have all the soft skills that people spend, like companies or government organizations spend billions of dollars every year trying to develop in people, which is leadership, or at the very least, the ability to lead yourself. The military has a very formalized plan around how to deliver and receive orders. And one of the top pieces that always starts everything is, what is the commander's intent? And the reason why it starts there is the mission will change. The plan will change. How we're planning and executing it will not go according to, how we wrote it up or how we rehearsed it. Conditions will change. But if you understand the intent, then you can go out and you can actually tackle a lot of these implied tasks and actually achieve what you're supposed to do. Maybe not to the letter of the mission because conditions change. And that flexibility, I cannot tell you how valuable it is, man. Like, especially looking especially as a startup, having the culture of flexibility, and also like not quitting on things, Kelly. That is something that is absolutely underrated. Grit or whatever you want to call it, but the ability to just gut it out and like get it through another 5 minutes.
Yep.
That's when most people quit. And then normally the finish line would have been around the corner.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's even with capital, right? Like I look back at when I started Capital Business Development, and I didn't necessarily know what I was doing. I knew what I wanted to accomplish. Like you said, I didn't necessarily know all the steps and pathways to get there. They developed as I continued to try to strive for my end goal, which was to create the best business development program around. And I figured I could figure it out as I went, and it really did work that way, Cole. It's so funny because I actually have an employee named Cole, so I think me and him chat as well, and we chat sometimes. And I just let him know, I'm like, when I started this business, I couldn't have seen it go this way. This was never on the game plan. However, it's still it still goes towards the goal that I was moving towards, right? It still meets the end criteria. But yes, I agree. It's like most companies will never get to that end criteria the exact way they planned it or the exact way they put it down on paper. Sometimes you have to be able to, like you said, flex and adapt to get there. But like you said, if you keep a picture in your mind as to where you want to go and you're always on that path, you might have to take an extra turn, but you're going to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's no shortage of turns. I'm not a big fan when people are like, oh, the ups and downs of being an entrepreneur. I'm like, I really don't. I try as much as possible not to think about it like that. Like if you ride the ups and downs, oh my god, like that's too hard. Like I just think about it like just compression and expansion. Like you're going to go through periods where this week is nothing seems like it's going right. Like, okay, how can you just like hold on and then get through this period? Because it'll break wide open again if you just hold on to it. But I mean, for people leaving the military, it's really straightforward. You have a set of skill sets that you can go out anywhere in the world and excel. Like people, especially in tech startups, I think are really starting. A lot of it in the United States, really, but a lot of the tech startups are really looking at pulling in veterans from different branches or different service occupations to bring. You could call it management, but really it's leadership and understanding the human terrain, which is the core of what technology companies actually really are.
Yes. And, obviously people are the hardest thing to work with because we're all different. Right? We all have different motivations. We all have different obligations. And managing people, if you can get good at that, you can pretty much get good at anything.
Yeah. It's a lot easier than writing code.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I can definitely see the aim to automate as much as possible. There's definitely people trying to think like, how in the world do we remove the human element? But no, you're right. It's not about removing the human element. It's about leading it better. It's about learning how to work with people better. And you're absolutely right. I think that's something that in the military, you guys are definitely doing better, and with many, 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 many centuries of learning how to do it right.
Yeah, and it consistently and constantly adapts, which also makes it interesting as well as to remain relevant to the population that you're working with.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell me about like aviation, right? Like where did your love of aviation come from, Cole? You don't just start a drone company if you don't have a passion for it. How did that come about?
So my father actually went and put himself through the Air Cadet program here in Canada. And so he went through and got his glider pilot's license and then his private pilot's license through the cadet program. So when I was growing up, my father worked in heavy construction. Started as a plumber right after high school, and then now he's, as bad of a term as it is, basically bootstrapped himself all the way. Now he works on major international projects and things like that. And he went through, and this was one of the big defining points I think for our formational parts of his life was going through the discipline and around the cadet program and getting the pilot side. So I've always had a love of aviation. My eyesight was in actually 2020. So in 99, 2000, they weren't accepting people who had laser eye surgery for the pilot for the Air Force. So the infantry wasn't really on the roadmap until after 9/11. So I've always had a passion. I think everybody really loves to look up and see an air show, or just when you hear a plane or a helicopter, if people don't turn their head and tilt it upwards to look and try and see it, I think there's probably something wrong with them.
They might be broken.
Yeah, there's something else going on inside right now. Like something about machines that fly in the air and people that are inside of them. It's amazing.
Yeah,
but
it's amazing.
The idea for the company was actually, overseas there's extremely expensive, exquisite, but a very limited number of these military drones, and the number one thing that they deliver for you on the ground is situational awareness, and it is truly, when you have that kind of a platform, even if not directly in your control or in your working directly for you, you have a level of safety that information can give you that is impossible sometimes to really understand. It's like having a flashlight in the dark, right?
Yeah.
Contrasting that here at home, though, like in the military, and we see this all the time now, the Canadian Armed Forces, especially the Army, gets called out to help support really in Western Canada right now with flooding or different situations, and wildfire in particular, and seeing how these major events are actually coordinated just is insane. Like we have thousands of people sometimes, or hundreds of troops and all this heavy equipment that would show up, aircraft, transports, helicopters, and the whole thing is being coordinated basically in real time by a guy or people in a plane or a helicopter with a radio and a paper map on their kneeboard, and they're trying to basically use a word picture to explain what the situation looks like when you're dealing with fires that are the size of a city.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, when the sun goes down, we're not going to do anything. We're going to pull back, and it's not safe enough. It's not safe enough. And then every morning we restart the cycle, trying to regain situation. Whereas it just seemed completely insane. So the idea was, really simple. In the military, we saw what really expensive drones could do. Those military drones are not following what normally happens with, high-end bleeding-edge technology like GPS or satellites or the microwave. Government invention that translates to commercial or enterprise, and then eventually down to consumer, right? Like we all probably have a GPS currently on us somewhere, from a watch to a cell phone, right? That technology, there's a gap, and so that gap means that this information availability is not there on the front lines here at home. So that's the actual kind of core mission of the company, is to bridge this capability gap between Boeing and Best Buy when it comes to what drones can do on the front lines of disasters.
That's amazing, and an amazing mission and purpose. I love it. Especially we're having the worst wildfire season that I can remember. I can't remember in my entire life there being as many wildfires as we have had now in the 2023 summer season here in Western Canada and Eastern Canada. Take your pick. The whole country's on fire. It just blows my mind, Cole. Why is it that nobody's been doing this? Why don't we have drones flying 24/7 above these fires, reporting back information, GPS mapping the area? The technology exists. Why are we so far behind?
There's a lot of different overlap to the question, Kelly. So if you think about it like this, we've essentially been fighting fires one way for the last 100 years, which is if you see a fire in the landscape, you immediately attack it and put it out. Fire is natural. So, and a good example is we all know pine cones. Pine cones are actually evolved to be the seeds. So after a fire goes through, it actually takes like the heat and intensity from a wildfire to actually activate a new seed from a pine cone to regenerate the forest. So it's entirely natural. And the First Nations groups have been doing essentially controlled burns on the landscape, for hundreds of years. We've been fighting fires in a way that we wanted to immediately suppress them. The challenge here in Canada specifically is that just here in Alberta, the forest north of Edmonton is the size of Sweden. And it has a very small population base. So now you have fires that are not normally near critical infrastructure, a town, a major type of critical infrastructure like a pipeline or a railway or something like that, or utilities. So you want to let that forest burn. The problem is we're actually getting, on the average, less wildfires per year. But
really,
the overall conditions have really changed that allow these fires now, what might have been a small fire that goes from a campfire size to now they're growing to be the size of small towns or cities in a matter of days, sometimes almost overnight is what it seems like, because with rising global temperatures, like climate change is a real factor in this whole thing. It's not, I would say, that the overriding factor. We've allowed the forest to basically be not be managed correctly. So you have a lot of fuel load that's built up over 70 years, 100 years, and all that is just sitting there, like, for lack of a better word, it's a giant bomb. So we're trying to pick apart a bomb, and at this point, we're just trying to hold it back. So these fires are growing faster. The actual fire behavior itself has changed. So fires aren't laying down at night, so to speak. They're now growing sometimes and moving faster at night than during the daytime. There's a bunch of these factors, and the whole process of basically taking 6 to 8 hours in a 24-hour cycle to take your eye off the ball, you can just almost feel how we immediately lose momentum at dusk.
Yeah. Is it even controllable?
Well, there has to be an equilibrium. So this is the moonshot, really, and how I kind of look at this whole opportunity. The real opportunity here is that there is a huge amount of fires that are going to continue to happen, but we're just dealing with these mega fires. So a mega fire is a relatively new term in like the last 10 years, where it's a fire that's over 100,000 hectares. Now you're talking about fires that are basically generating their own wind and weather cycles. So we're seeing all this, crazy wildfire behavior because these small fires are now rapidly being the fast track to becoming mega fires. And we don't have the resources to actually fight mega fires. The best thing we can do
Yeah.
is radically transform how fast and effective we can be at the initial attack. Immediate early detection and attack of like by ground or by air, but really getting on top of them, because if you don't do that in the first 12 hours, if a fire's not basically contained or suppressed in the next 24 hours, it's probably going to grow to be completely out of control. And then at that point, now you're going to spend millions and millions of dollars just on the response for that one fire. And we don't have anywhere near the resources to do it. Like we don't have 1,000 air tankers or scoopers or water bombers to go out and try and tackle all these problems.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you kind of hit on the fact, that, like you said, just north of our city, there's a forest the size of Sweden, right? Like there are completely unpopulated areas. And if you get a lightning strike there, you may not even know you have a forest fire until it's too late.
So it comes, an interesting thing with the lightning is, about 20 to 25% of fires are caused by lightning. The other majority of the fires are human caused, unintentional, from utility lines and vegetation overgrowth, or somebody throwing a cigarette butt, as crazy as that is, out the window and starting a fire near a highway, off-road vehicles. There's a bunch of different reasons behind it, but about 70 to 75% of fires, at least in Western Canada, are human caused or human driven. The lightning strike is a good one because we can actually have all these sensors now that can not just tell us when lightning strikes happen or the rough location for them, but we can actually tell when there's been a positive strike, or there's been a lightning strike to the ground that is likely high enough in energy to create a fire. So we can actually narrow that down.
Wow.
But then we have to get out there and actually verify.
How do they tell that, Cole?
In some cases, you have a series of lookout. Like Alberta is actually really interesting because we have a series of lookout towers. Some of these are being automated now with static cameras to detect smoke on the horizon.
Yeah,
a lot of them though are still one crazy university co-op student all summer sitting on a tower with a pair of binoculars looking for smoke on the horizon. That, by the way, is definitely not a good summer job. I don't care what people say.
You would not recommend.
I would not encourage. Yeah. I mean,
oh boy, no, that's amazing. So, okay, so then tell me, what do you see? What does the future look like? Are we going to have drones that just fly at I don't know, 50,000 feet, and all they do is look for fires? Is that even possible? Because to me, that seems like a solution. Why don't we just have drones flying 24/7 at certain heights to see if they can find them ahead of time?
So well, this will sound like what it sounds like. I mean, the only way that this works is if we automate things. So currently we use lookout towers. We also spend a lot of money securing and retaining either fixed wing or often cases helicopters to go out and do what's called aerial patrol. So during the daytime, helicopters will get under contract. They'll go out and they'll fly around and they get their flight hours, but they're looking for smoke on the landscape visually. So you might get an iPhone photo from a helicopter pilot that gives you a rough idea on what they saw. This is not effective because you can't actually tell if a fire is small. That helicopter flew by, you're looking for smoke. So in some cases, maybe they sneezed, maybe they missed it. But the only way to really get around this is you have to have some type of intelligence-driven prevention and preparedness side to it. So drones flying around and looking at it, absolutely. If you had in the lightning strike example, you have an early warning network. Okay, why not send a drone that can then fly out there and then have drones that can do it autonomously, as in they don't require a direct human operator to remotely pilot them. That allows you then to scale up. So you might have 20 or you might have 2,000 lightning strikes in an overnight period in a region. It's too much for somebody to fly around and look at. So having the ability to send out drones autonomously to go out and actually do the investigation and then provide real-time feedback on what they found, that is how you can really shorten the decision-making cycle or the response time. And, at a really 50,000 foot view, we have to get radically improve the effectiveness of how we can put fires out. And the only way to do that, as I see it, is not building drones that are the size of a water bomber. It's connecting everybody involved, industry and government, that work hand in hand with the information that they need. Give them, in the military, it's called a common operating picture. But really, what's the real time status of the situation? And then how can you get that information to people and then use it, and then they can use that to coordinate things. If we can get really good at actually attacking and putting out fires, then Kelly, eventually we can build a confidence to actually start our own fires and do these prescribed burns or controlled burns and actually control them.
Yeah.
Right now, we're not very good at it, to be honest, and that's why we do very little of them. And that is probably
So
we should get back to like an equilibrium.
yeah, you're absolutely right. Like there has to be, I get what you're saying about there being too much fuel, about when these fires spark up and suddenly it's like they get out of control because a fire that should have happened naturally wasn't allowed to. It's an interesting conundrum, isn't it? Because on the one hand, we're trying to put out fires, but if we would just do more controlled burns or find a way to do this naturally, we would actually have less fires.
And it's unfortunately it's not even that clear cut. So you look at where some places like towns, obviously they want to attract people to come and move and live in, say, Kelowna, because it's beautiful. I mean, it's wine country, it's the Okanagan, and at the same time you also have massive crushing wildfires, and you have the expansion of these communities all around the world, really, into areas that are really pushing this wildland urban interface further and further into the forest. So now you don't have a standoff between beautiful Kelowna and the surrounding areas, or different ski resorts or summer resorts and things like that. So
yeah, where at one time there would have somewhat been a natural barrier, we've built some homes.
yeah, and now you start looking at the what this actually turns into. And if you follow the data, a really good example. So this is, near the tail end of August. In June, State Farm, which is about 20% of the U.S. insurance market, has now basically notified everybody that they are no longer going to insure residential and commercial properties for fire in the state of California. That is like the world's, I think, 7th or largest economy taken in isolation. And State Farm is saying that they're no longer going to insure it because their modeling as an insurance company says we're going to continue to take bigger and bigger losses as we look forward, like we're pulling out of the market. So the only other way this challenge really kind of gets funded is through the government, right? So the insured losses and then the uninsured losses side. So if you're a business owner or you're a resident, now you're looking at the government being responsible both for the wildfire management and response and also recovery side, and that cost is only going to keep going exponentially up almost every year. It's a
well, that's it. It makes you wonder because like in our case here in Canada and Alberta, right, we've had some pretty major fires over the last 5 years. Like Fort McMurray is burned down. At this point, Kelowna is basically burned down. We've had nothing but horrible wildfires, even right here in our backyard. Like me and Cole both live just outside of, well, I live in Edmonton and Cole lives just outside of Edmonton, I believe. Is that right, Cole? And like Villeneuve is halfway between Edmonton and Spruce Grove, which is where we kind of started the show and I come from. But, literally Entwistle was on fire at the beginning of this summer, and it's 45 minutes from us, right? Like these are happening in our backyard and they're getting bad, and a lot of people are being evacuated. And there's not really a good plan for what to do. Like nobody's really prepared for this. I know I don't go into spring thinking what happens if I have to evacuate my home. And I doubt many people do. And it's an interesting problem, but it is becoming more of a problem. And it does start to make you wonder, like if the insurance companies, because obviously our insurance is going up and up and up and up and up because they're having to consistently build a new city every year, right? Like it's getting crazy. What do you even do? Like whose fault is it? How do you even handle that?
Well, I'm not a big believer in the fault side. I'm a big believer in the fact that this is going to have to be something that where we can't just solely rely on a provincial or a federal organization to just do it by themselves. And a really clear example of this. So obviously it's been a crazy year. So last week I was up by Rainbow Lake, so about a 10-hour drive northwest of Edmonton. And there's a fire up there that was about 180,000 hectares. So just a pretty big ripper. And then there was also another fire from British Columbia crossing the border. And we went up there under contract to go and help support. So I was backfilling one of our teams. And going up there, you see, it's not just a forest out there. There's a major oil and gas field out there as well. And it was very interesting because the volunteer fire chief also works at that energy company. And he's also working hand in glove with what the energy company's resources are to try and make sure that he can be the focal point, the coordinator for what this, multinational company can bring to the province and their responses. And there's teams from Australia, the United States, also all help working this fire complex. And at the same time, there has to be a closer coordination between industry and government, because as much as government has the lead on this, it's very much preventative, right? We all know how this works in the industry with emergency management, is that it's very hard to get something into the budget. Like Alberta's normally, I think it's somewhere between $700 to $850 million a year is the budget for forestry, parks and tourism, the current ministry. Some years though, they might have a real cost of dollars spent. That might be $1 billion. It might be like 2016 where it's 14 billion. Like, there's a big Chuckhead fire up by High Level as well. That fire is several $1 billion in real costs, not insurance and claims, like real costs of, what does it cost to put 58 helicopters and 1,000 people and a couple hundred heavy equipment bulldozers on that fire line for 4 or 5 months. These fires have a real cost, and it's getting a closer fusion between the two, both government and industry.
So tell me about some of the solutions that you were working on to help address these fires, Cole. Like, what is some of the technology that's going on inside of these drones you guys are building? And by the way, they're amazing. If you're listening to this show right now, you have to check out Cole's website. You'll be able to find it on the links to this show. I'll make sure that it's up there, but you need to check out the Pegasus website. His website is beautiful. It's one of the nicest websites I think I've ever seen, Cole. And I've been doing marketing a long time. Your website is awesome. And he has video of the UAVs, and they are next level. Like, tell me about some of the technology you got running inside of these things, Cole. What can they do?
So first and foremost, they're designed to carry sensors, and the focus here is being able to hit and stick, so to speak, over top of a problem. To do that, it's important to probably talk about airspace. So when there's smoke on the landscape, so there's a fire on the landscape, that wildfire actually becomes restricted airspace. So basically about 3 nautical miles around the edge of that fire, there's a box up to 3,000 feet above ground level. So this box can actually expand as the fire gets bigger, but it's restricted because there's so much traffic that's being flown in and out of it, right? You have helicopters flying low level or air tankers, and they don't want private pilots out there sightseeing, and you definitely don't want drones. The reason why people are really nervous around drones is because you can't see them. You're talking about, it's already low visibility. You're flying low to the ground, and now you're going to try and pick out, a DJI Phantom or something like that. That's, the size of a coffee pot. This is going to be, it's impossible. So everybody's really nervous around drones. So the airspace is restricted. So we've had approvals to fly in this airspace for almost the last 4 years already. So that's actually not the challenge. The challenge here is, how do you actually safely have drones and manned aircraft in the same airspace at the same time? So if your listeners can't obviously see this, but I mean, there's a smile on both of our faces, because to solve such a massive challenge like wildfire, we have to actually, as a company, develop the technology that's required for drones to actually commercialize and be able to connect people with this data. So we have to solve a slightly smaller problem, which is, what is the next century of aviation actually going to look like? And spoiler, it will be autonomous.
Yeah.
So we developed the last most valuable technology sets that are required for drones to detect and then avoid safely other potential hazards in the air, helicopters, birds, other drones. And to do this reliably, this is why drones have had 20 years to really underwhelm everybody except for the military, because even the military can't fly drones over wildfires, right? Unless you're talking basically having a chase plane flying or an escort or blocking out a big chunk of airspace at 30,000 feet. The challenge here for us as a company is, we develop drones, but we've really built originally just as technology demonstrators to show that we see the ability to connect people to the data side first and foremost, and then we need a platform. So the drones are really the tool, and we use several different types of drones right now. Some are 4 to 5 hour multi-rotor that can stay relatively low and slow, and then the core of what we do though is these vertical takeoff and landing fixed wing drones. So we take off and land like a helicopter, and then we fly like a regular fixed wing plane right after launching from there. So the aircraft actually have the ability to use a number of different sensors on them, from air-to-air radar to other sensors like cameras and computer vision. to what manned aircraft some are equipped to do, which is broadcasting their position. We can actually receive that transponder information as well. The core of it, though, is we have to build drones that are safe enough to not just fly in the same airspace as manned aircraft around a wildfire. That's how we go from working at night when nobody else is flying to now working into the daytime and continuing that 24-hour coverage. That's the next big stake in the ground for us. But also not having to actually send a team by ground to drive in vehicles to go and launch inside of that restricted airspace bubble. So the holy grail for us really is beyond visual line of sight. And so it's beyond visual line of sight of the person who's actually operating the drone. The reason why it's so hard is you don't know what else is out there. So the existing standards have always kind of been have a visual observer or some human standing out there looking at the sky, at the skyline for an aircraft or a helicopter or something flying nearby where that drone is. That doesn't scale. So we're building aircraft that not just have this sensor suite on board, but also can then, by themselves, make the smartest, safest decision every single time. So without requiring us to send a signal back to an operator, have them make a decision, send it back up to the aircraft to then make a maneuver. When you're talking about a closure rate sometimes of, a couple 100 kilometers an hour, run out of time really quick. So building drones that can actually, we're focusing on the safety side of the aircraft. And that's really, building the drones as the tool to unlock this large opportunity.
How far, sorry, Cole, I didn't mean to cut you off. How far away are we from this being possible? Like for us being able to send up an autonomous drone at night over a fire and hopefully not conflict. I guess you were saying at night, they don't conflict because there's not planes in the sky flying at night over a fire. But let's assume that you have multiple aircraft in the area. How far are we from you being able to send up a drone, give it a mission, and just turn around and walk away and let it perform its mission, and it'll avoid all obstacles, other aircraft? Are we there? Is it just formalities at this point, or is the technology still being developed?
So this is where it gets hard. All this is actually hard, by the way. It comes down to regulatory risk. So most people would probably recoil or tune out at this point. So drones have really had a huge inflection point as far as interest. There's several $1 billion of venture capital investment in drones in 2015 to 2018. Everybody thought that drones were going to be the next big thing. But the regulators, the FAA, Transport Canada, EASA in Europe, they were not going to move. They didn't budge. So now the timing and the why now kind of moment is Transport Canada here, nationally is just released a series of draft rules that will come into force starting late next year or probably mid next year. These rules outline low risk beyond visual line of sight for drones. The regulators are moving because they have a ton of downward pressure from both industry and government to basically, okay, we can't just keep saying no, and we can't have a two-tier system when it comes to things that fly. You can't have rules just for drones. You can't have rules just for things that fly with people on board. You have to have a fusion. And so this advanced air mobility is kind of the term that's kind of coined for it. But in the next 5 to 10 years, you'll see there's just one set of rules now for everything that flies. And to do that is extremely hard because you're competing with an industry that's 120 years old, almost. Now they're having to force change on them. So the interesting thing is, how does this whole thing happen? It's going to happen a lot faster than people think. Can drones right now fly over and map fires? Yes, that's table stakes, so to speak. It's not commonplace, but it's already the state of the art today. The ability to have drones autonomously fly, say 100 kilometers or 200 kilometers from one location out through uncontrolled airspace, like the Wild West. You don't know who's actually out there flying because they're not being tracked by an air traffic controller. Yeah. That type of encounter, that level of unknown, that's what really makes people nervous on the regulatory side. Is once you set a standard, everybody else will then work to hit that standard. Then the whole thing takes off, literally, where you're forecasting there's probably 50 to 60,000 light aircraft in North America, helicopters or Cessnas.
Yeah.
What happens when 7 million drones join them?
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding. Holy cow. Is that really the scope you think that we're heading towards?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
That's unreal.
Most of the
so basically, you won't be able to look up. You won't be able to look up and not see a drone. They're going to be everywhere.
I think it will depend on where you live. I
Yeah.
know there's a lot of, and this isn't our wheelhouse, but there's a lot of talk right now about like drone delivery and having drones being able to deliver different packages. I just think, from a really bottom up practical aspect, uh, it's not dropping off a box of hamburger helper from Walmart for you that what you probably really want. It's probably something closer to looking at industry. Like here in Alberta, we have, with the oil and gas sector, there's an industry, there's a whole subset called hot shotting. So if you have a
Mm-hmm.
big diesel generator that breaks down and you have a one component that has to get repaired, you generally have somebody in a pickup truck that has to then grab that part from the supply depot and then take every speeding ticket possible all the way up to get that, because you're probably losing $200,000 to $500,000 an hour for that diesel turbo generator to be down, or that oil rig not
Yeah.
to be pumping. So that hot shotting would be one of these like extremely high value, very clear pain point things for drone delivery. So you would probably look at seeing drones really starting not downtown Edmonton or downtown Toronto. You should really look at where it will emerge, which will be on the frontier with industry. So big enterprise operations. That's where I think you'll see it first, and then eventually it'll work its way closer and closer into the more higher risk areas, like where cities and populations really are.
Yeah, yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and to me that makes a ton of sense. Like I'm honestly surprised that we don't have this already, because it's like you see every week. All you have to do is open your YouTube, and there's videos of manned drones at this point where where people are making ones that people can get in and fly around, and it just blows my mind that we have essentially bottlenecked this industry. And to me, it's the future. It really is. It's the future of delivery. It's the future, in your case, of being able to control fires and all sorts of commercial applications. It's the future of any type of like hot shotting. You're absolutely right. Like, and companies, like you said, they'll pay the money. Like they'll pay the money to have something flown out to them in 1 hour if it takes their equipment up, especially in the oil and gas sector in Alberta. It just blows, like you said, if it's crazy, if that's the problem, if it's regulation, yeah, they need to get that fixed, because it's the future and it's coming whether you like it or not.
It is, but at the same time, once you open Pandora's box on this, and we actually have worked with Transport Canada for the last almost over 2 years now through an official partnership. We're not at the white paper stage, Kelly. Last year we did over 254 flights. The scale of the data that we're actually experiencing real time and doing this live, so to speak. This is again one of these things about going fast, iterating. We've crashed a ton of drones, by the way, safely always, but or in safe locations. But the important thing is, we're learning as fast as we can. And you look at where the regulator is. We can't make them move faster, but we can really help provide industry feedback, so to speak, in real world use cases. And I think one of the interesting things about what we do specifically is that if you're going to get unique approvals, and we have several, it comes down to the use case. So hamburger helper or dropping off a new pair of Nikes to somebody at their
Probably
house.
not.
Is that really a high enough use case for them to really look at maybe potentially trialing new rules? What about trying to save a city? Okay, that changes the dynamic. And so again, it comes down to less about the technology, really about building both a track record, a reputation, and the relationships that are required. I mean, you made a really generous comment about the website. We don't pay for SEO or marketing. All of our traffic is organic, and the reason why is we want to know if we're actually doing well. And a lot of that comes down to being authentic as a startup.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it is well done. I wouldn't congratulate you if it wasn't well done. Regardless.
I'll make sure I tell the team.
It's beautiful. It's exactly the way that I like to recommend websites. I like visual appeal. You got to think about it's clean. It only gives you the information you need to know. It's very well done. So I don't know who built it, but yeah, you should congratulate them.
I'll tell the team.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I want to talk, Cole, when we talked about this, when we had kind of our pre-chat, when I first invited you to the show, one of the things that I wanted to get into with you was I think there's a lot of commercial application for drones that companies are not thinking about. And I was hoping that potentially we could address some of the commercial solutions. A lot of the solutions we've been talking about tend to be, I imagine, more on the government side, or where, they're publicly funded initiatives, right? But let's talk about commercial applications. Drones are becoming a huge thing. What are some of the commercial applications that you guys support at Pegasus? What are some of the, if you were selling some of your drones to business, what are some of the applications they might want to think about? Because I think there's a lot of applications and they just need that little kick in the butt to say, oh shit, I never thought about that.
Yeah. This is, in a lot of ways, it's like inventing the plane and the smartphone at the same time. You're talking about a whole completely different way of like not revolutionizing existing industry, but creating a whole series of new ones. So a couple of really good examples. So we obviously, we've talked about this, but we focus on solving wildfire through actionable information and connecting people with data. That's the mission of the company. That's our North Star. And, it's from a physics standpoint, it's possible, but it's a lifetime. It'll take a lifetime of effort, cumulatively to do that. You also look at what else is out there, though, on the frontier, so to speak, where wildfires are. Now you look at all the industries that have a federal requirement to inspect and monitor their assets. So the Railway Act, the Pipeline Act, the Utilities Act are all good examples. You look at, in particular, we pulled together a consortium 2 years ago, both government at the federal and provincial level, as well as industry partners, and one of them, which is Canadian Pacific Rail. So we're now working with them on trialing long-range track inspection. So the state of the art right now is either they have a helicopter, in most cases, fly and do a visual inspection of their line. And then obviously that's difficult because you're flying a helicopter while trying to also look out the window. And then at the same time, then you also have a different layer to that track inspection where they shut down, a division of track, and they put, those trucks with the rollers on them, the actual rail wheels, and then that high car will then go down the line and do a visual, or basically almost like a physical check, and seeing like if there's bumps in the track, how does it look from the ground level. When that track is shut down for that high car, though, no commercial freight is obviously can move. So now you have a safety issue that is stopping a commercial issue. So drones have the ability to now fly and collect that data. This has been proven through a bunch of different early use cases with small drones, but doing it at scale, not doing 5 kilometers of track inspection, but say doing 500 kilometers. Now you totally change that industry. And one of the interesting parts for us is this consortium of partnerships that we pull together. This is helping support our development of our aircraft and our technology towards full commercialization in the next 18 months. That's our current track to be able to fly beyond visual line of sight in uncontrolled airspace.
Wow. But
we also, equally as importantly, have to actually do the education piece. We have to work with these groups. And if you're used to sending 2 people or 1 person in a truck riding your rail line to do your inspection, what type of data do you need to replace that current process? Is it LiDAR? Is it full motion video? Is it photogrammetry? So an aerial map, point densities, accuracies, all these different factors. And most of them are kind of starting not from zero, but from a place of we don't know. And if we're talking about major industries that are billions of dollars a year in safety and management costs, they're going to try and find a way to reduce those costs while still maintaining or ideally improving that level of safety. These use cases that we're doing, this is where we can actually start working with groups like CP Rail. And now we're giving them different types of data sets, and we're finding that it's actually not what we originally thought either. So we spend we definitely don't spend enough, because I don't think you ever can, but we spend a lot of time actually trying to talk to industry partners and understanding what they're looking at. And from the wildfire standpoint, this is actually phenomenal, because we're now able to, some of these use cases last year, Kelly, are amazing. We've got some of the video published, I think, already online, but we talked previously, we don't fight fires at night. If you're a ground team, you probably want to try and fight fires at night because it's cooler, obviously, and then sometimes the fire behavior is less active at nighttime. But you can't go out at night because helicopters can't fly, so you don't have a casualty evacuation or a safety plan, and you don't have that situational awareness. One of the use cases we did last year with the Government of Alberta is we went out there and put a drone over top of a ground crew moving around the woods at night. And originally, it was actually supposed to be just about like a walk-through, talk-through kind of practice. And then we started seeing hotspots, and they couldn't. Then we started using the drone, to actually walk and talk them on to these hotspots. And even at night, they still couldn't see it until they were like 1 foot away.
On top of it.
And then it's like, hey, reach out right in front of you. And so we've got video from the drones and from the ground side, GoPro and stuff like that, of these guys in the woods.
Yeah.
And now we're finding hotspots, and they're like, well, these last few hours of doing this probably saved us a week of work walking around the woods to try and do the same thing. So these use cases are really going to help set the conditions, obviously for us, but for the wider industry, about what does adoption look like, and really de-risking it for enterprise and government.
Yeah. What's your so right now, are you guys essentially flying these drones, providing the service, like essentially providing services to come out, or are you actually selling individual drones and training people how to use them and saying, here, this is your drone now, figure it out? Where are you guys at right now?
So a little bit of both. So the core of what we're doing right now is delivering using this technology and these tools as a service. We're doing this through a couple of different ways. One, we'll send a team out to go and deliver and collect that data and then deliver it. And then at the same time, this is again about early commercialization and also use case development. So we're really understanding the market. We're helping to transition or transform. We also hold a Transport Canada recognized ground school. So everybody in the company is a drone pilot. At least that's the mandate. At least get your basic license. And the reason why is everybody in our company needs to understand at a basic level what we're doing. So we've also been getting a lot of experience running basically ground schools for individuals, businesses, and even government organizations. And part of this comes down to, it's not just about the tool, Kelly. Like it comes down to, there's a series of different overlapping requirements. You have to have somebody who's qualified to actually operate the equipment. You have to have the equipment you have to have an aircraft, for example, to, right now there isn't very much of a standard at all. It's really like I promise about manufacturer's assurances. Is this drone actually built and tested to be safe enough to fly near or over people? That's a big question right now. And some of these new rules are going to actually look at taking the first big steps towards standardizing the industry for that, which is overall a very good thing, even for manufacturers. We have to do it anyways if we're going to have good products. Then you have safety systems, quality. There's a whole bunch of different things. So delivering it as a service right now makes the most sense for this use case development. How we look at this, I guess, in the next 5 to 10 years is through a series of partnerships. Obviously, we're building these aircraft right now. We've got some phenomenal partners over the next year that we're going to work with when we begin entering commercialization and going into low rate production of our aircraft. And then through partnerships and joint ventures with different groups and different geographies, we would look at a regional hub. So if you have, say, for example, a regional hub in Kelowna, you don't just have the wildfire management use case. Now they get a partner in us who supplies the aircraft, all the training, and then that full life cycle management for that. For lack of a better word, a franchise is how we're looking at it right now. And then, then you also have the ability to then have a network effect. If you have a regional hub, then how many drones do you need to go out and fly, track inspection, railways, utilities inspections, or ready for when wildfires do happen?
Yeah. Yeah. No, and especially if you can get them to a level where they are operating autonomously, where you can pre-program the mission and say, here's the mission we want. And, you take the human element out of it. To me, at that point, everyone's your customer. Everyone's going to need one for one thing or another, right? And the cool thing about robotics, and I love working with robotics companies, is that the applications, they can change. You aren't roped into just one application because the ecosystem is so big. You can add different attachments. As long as you have a great platform to work from, the applications of use is almost endless.
Absolutely. I mean, the number of different sensors that are out there, it's not limitless, but it continues to expand. And the people who are specialized in making LiDAR or different sensor gimbals, we're not going to get into that. Those are the partners and suppliers that we want to work with. And as they evolve and adapt, we make sure that we're building aircraft that can not just have our proprietary detect and avoid system and some of the other sensors on board, but also be able to, have that open mission architecture where they can continually evolve as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's it. It's like you have an amazing platform, and I imagine that the list of accessories that is going to eventually be on all of your drones is going to be just next level. The applications list is just going to be huge and growing every year. And I imagine as there's new applications, there'll be new platforms. Like it's it's a really great time to be in drones and to be in robotics in general. And I'm a little bit in envy of all of you robotics CEOs. You guys are doing some pretty amazing things, and I find it very impressive.
Well, it's I appreciate you saying it. There's a very common saying in Silicon Valley, which is hardware is hard, and there's a reason why. Because the software, it's very low overhead, but hardware built in physical products, generally, a lot of people are really nervous about investing or starting hardware-based companies, even if it's, in our case, hardware and software combined. The degree of difficulty is obviously much higher, but at the same time, some of the most valuable technologies that we have that influence society at every level, the smartphone, even the power drill. Look at battery technology for cordless drills. How has that totally revolutionized construction and the housing industry or home repairs?
Totally.
All these different things.
Mm-hmm.
Hardware is, it's hard, but it's some of the most valuable technology that you can build. So it's definitely still an interesting company, but a lot of challenges too.
Well, and you know what? I've had enough technology founders on this show to know that Edmonton is a tech hub. It is the fastest growing tech sector in the world. Like, these are not low level. Cole, or just tell us a little bit. You guys have placed pretty high in some pretty sweet competitions. Tell us about Boeing and tell us about NASA.
Well, the NASA thing is one of these things that just comes back to being a good person and talking to people and trying to build a network and relationships. I mean, I call them our Silicon Valley fairy godparents, because every so often they just show up and they're like, "Hey, you should apply for this, or you should think about that." And then,
yeah,
the one thing that they asked us to apply for, we applied for, and they're like, "Has NASA heard of you?" We're just trying to figure out how we're going to get through this year, like the next 6 months. And they're like, "You should apply for NASA." Yeah. So we applied, didn't think anything of it. 4 months later, came back and they're like, "Congratulations, you're a NASA semifinalist in this global technology competition." And everybody else was all space-based or on orbit technologies. And we're like, well, the first A in NASA is aeronautics. So I guess it's kind of back to the roots for them, I guess. But ironically, NASA is one of the groups about 7-8 years ago that was tapped by the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration to try and figure out how our drones and manned aircraft get integrated. So it's not a problem. It's a NASA problem, like putting people on the moon. So it was extremely humbling. The Boeing thing. So we actually got our first contract with Boeing prior to this, and then they obviously asked us about this global AI and autonomy accelerator. And this was definitely not the traditional, here's how you make a pitch deck, and here's how you think about pitch coaching, or here's, basically, kind of normal kind of, baseline accelerator stuff. It was all business development, and there was a lot of founder and team professional development in it, but it was based out of London, and Boeing gave us access to the entirety of Boeing. I mean, like the entirety of Boeing. So it's a bit of a tongue in cheek, but I call them the Boeing Mafia. So we've got multiple contracts with Boeing, and internally we have a series of these internal champions that I call the Boeing Mafia, because last year Boeing made a minority investment in the company, and so now we're a Boeing portfolio company, and this makes it extremely interesting on how I can get introduced just once, even sometimes, but I can basically get introduced to pretty much anybody we need to in Boeing. And these internal champions, these are the change makers that really help us cut through the world's biggest aerospace companies' red tape. So, and really holding those relationships are huge. But it's, you're kind of asking like the whole thing about these programs. They're all about developing and continuing to learn. Like, some people might say, "Oh, well, I don't need to because we've already gone through an accelerated program, or I'm a second-time founder, or I'm a multi-exit founder, or I've done this before, or our team, we don't have time to spend on it." You have to make a conscious decision. We learned a huge amount from going through that program, and coming first is always great. But regardless of where we actually placed, I mean, we built incredible relationships with Boeing, with groups all over the world, actually, that they brought to this program. So it's just trying to make the most out of these opportunities.
Yeah. And you hit on something that I talk about a lot on my show. And, it's like, I've been doing business development and sales for over 15 years. But the way that I see it, I was only an expert until yesterday. Like, technology, everything is changing so quickly that if you aren't keeping ahead of it, if you aren't staying humble, if you aren't looking for that next thing to help you out, you are going to fall behind. So we can never just sit on our thrones and say, "Yep, we're experts. We don't need to learn anything more." I love that. I love that you're open to learning. And you know what I mean? I agree. We're only experts until yesterday. Today, we got to keep learning.
Yeah. And, being Canadian, the BlackBerry story is a great example of that, right? I mean, they built a great product, and they were extremely tuned in with who their buyers were, which were IT people and really on that side. So they didn't really think that the iPhone was going to be that big of a deal. They didn't have that situational awareness at the time, and forward looking our company culture, I think, to really question at a really deep level, is this an existential change to the industry? And obviously it turns out it was, but you have to look at it constantly and evaluate.
Yeah. Well, I think when you're at the top, in the case of BlackBerry was at that time, yeah, it becomes a silo. Like you said, it's like there's not that external. It's like, of course, we're the best. We don't need to change anything.
Yeah,
right. And I think that all companies are at risk of that. All companies are at risk of that if they're not staying humble and realizing that things can flip on their heads in an instant.
Yeah, it's interesting, especially for a startup, right? Because you're trying to find the right balance between like picking one specific thing, and then obviously everybody talks about startups and the ability to pivot. There's times where it's just don't flinch. Don't blink, just hold the line, continue doing what you're doing. And you might see something over here that makes sense, but sometimes you do have to pivot and you have to drill in and we're going left. Like today, we're planning on this for the next 6 months. Today we're going left. We're changing the direction, we're going left. And so it's hard, and you never have enough information to make the decision, man. I think that's the one thing that a lot of people don't really catch on to, is that you just make a series of the best decisions possible, and normally like risks the company or catastrophic scenarios. For me, it's like I never get the fun ones. It's like this will kill us if we don't do something. This might kill us less, or there might be a better chance. But those are the things that really I think you really have to spend the majority of your time on, which is not the actual coding or development or things like that. It's especially trying to run a team that's growing, making sure that we're making the right decisions with the best possible information we can.
Yeah. Well, I think you're in the right time, you're in the right place, and you have the right product, Cole. It's only going up, man. It's amazing. What you guys are doing is so cool, and I'm so thankful to have you on the show. And I know I came across you actually because you popped up on my LinkedIn, and we both kind of commented. You had some air show pictures up, and I love aviation, so I had to comment. And I was like, you know what? I would love to meet you. I didn't know you were making this in my backyard, but we need to chat because this is so cool. Yeah. And so it's been a total pleasure having this conversation. So I just wanted to thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. And at this point, I'm pretty sure we'll be a part of that air show in Villeneuve come next year as well.
That's awesome. I think that's a great idea, because I think we need to show more people what drone technology is capable of.
Yeah, absolutely. It is the next century of aviation, and it is going to be a wild ride.
Yes. Cole, if you could give one piece of advice to the entrepreneurs listening to this show today about just getting started, give them a little bit of motivation, what might that be?
Humility. I've met people, and it sounds weird. Like, we know a lot of weird people, from NASA to now the King of England. We've met a lot of weird people, and it's humility. I mean, the people that I've met that are the smartest are always, without a doubt, always the most humble, and because they're always wondering, what am I doing wrong, or what is going wrong, or what is the better way to do things, or how can I help better? So the humility to be able to consistently challenge and ask questions of assumptions, it would be humility. That's the only way to look. I could really frame it into one word.
Humility. That's a great one. I absolutely love it. Well, that concludes our show today, Cole. This has been episode 58. I have not thought of a title, but I got one on the top of my mind. And we have been graced with the president, founder, and CEO, Cole Rosentreter of Pegasus Imagery. It was absolutely amazing having you on the show, Cole. Looking forward to seeing what's coming next from you guys. Until next time, we will catch you on the flip side.
This has been the Business Development Podcast with Kelly Kennedy. Kelly has 15 years in sales and business development experience within the Alberta oil and gas industry and founded his own business development firm in 2020. His passion and his specialization is in customer relationship generation and business development. The show is brought to you by Capital Business Development, your business development specialists. For more, we invite you to the website at www.capitalbd.ca. See you next time on the Business Development Podcast.